Did you see, though, that the women's bowling team at UNL just won in the national championship again? Probably. I don't have it here, though. So in here, now, the Nebraska volleyball team, I think, is a really good success story. In fact, a lot of women's sports at UNL are okay. I'll try to remember that by 2:30. All right. So let's talk about crackers. What is a cracker? Our book makes this distinction. So in two places, we actually call people that hack unethically a cracker at some point in our book, which is kind of weird. But we also use the term cracker to be some form of a tool that we use to break in or infiltrate a system. So if you see that term, it can be both a person, place, or a thing. So if we're going to use some kind of a wireless cracker, that's what we're doing. And again, a lot of those we can deploy directly out of something like Kali Linux. But we even have some online tools that we can use that are just built in. So ping, we can actually use ping as a destructive tool. It's a reconnaissance tool. We can use it. Traceroute, we can kind of see some pathways so we can get some ideas what's going on. ipconfig, so not only can we display things, but we can also make changes to an individual station. So Linux has the ifconfig, very similar. So ARP, address resolution protocol, another language, we can use that to try to break into that ARP cache. And we can look at either what's been poisoned. So if we've poisoned the local ARP on a computer, we can actually see where it's trying to point to and instead. So these are just some of the tools that we use. I will say I don't typically use NetStat for whatever weird reason, but it's a useful tool. Wireshark we've come up with is a great tool for reconnaissance out there. So your assignment this week requires you to go out and install something called Nmap. And so we're going to do that really quickly here in class. I don't know if I can record the video of it, so we'll see. There's Netcat. There's all different kinds of vulnerability scanners out there that you can utilize. What's really interesting, there's some researchers took Nmap and actually faced it outward, and they've modified it enough to face, instead of inside of a network, they're actually pointing it out on the entire internet, and they're actually trying to do scans across every IP address imaginable on the internet. Now, if we're just IPv4, they've got it down to about 45 minutes a scan of every possible IP address, which is a little frightening when you think about that. So there's a lot of other things you can do. So we looked at that OpenPuff, that stenography, where we're hiding something inside of another vessel. So there are some tools. Hang on. Apparently my watch decided to tell my phone to play Five-Finger Death Punch or something there. So, all right. So inside of things. So an audio file. We could hide something inside of there. So there's a lot of other tools out there, and we have to think about what is our vulnerabilities. So if all of a sudden we see that Mike in accounting is getting all kinds of these strange pictures from odd email addresses, maybe we might think, hey, there's something a little weird going on there. So vulnerability scan like that Nmap typically is an automated report. Usually they're fairly well designed, and you can put some parameters in there, and you look at what's open, what's vulnerable, if you're missing security controls, if you have open ports, all those kinds of things, and you can scan through your network. So there's a couple of different ways we can do that. And so there's what we call an intrusive scan, and so it actually tries to get inside of a system or another computer. So typically we don't do that on a live running network unless we're hired to do that. And then the non-intrusive, so it takes all this information and creates a report and says, well, we think this is what your vulnerabilities are. But one of the other things we can do, and especially if we have knowledge of our system, we can put in credentials, and those credentials, so if my Active Directory, I know the admin password, and I put in, administrator/password, and I have it in here, that can give me greater tools and greater depth of that scan. Now, how would I get that? So if I'm an internal customer, I know that. But if I'm an external scanner and I've come in and I've figured out your admin passwords, that means we have another issue there. So that's the difference between credentialed and non-credentialed scans. And so when you did the Spiceworks a long time ago, it also would allow you to use credentials or not. And if you use credentials, you got a lot more information because it actually would then install a little piece of a program on there. So the next step up, so we do a vulnerability assignment, and then we actually do something called a penetration test. And so we've seen a couple videos of these. So they can be physical. You may have a physical penetration test. There's a cyber test. So you typically hire outside companies to do this. So there are companies all over the country. That's what they specialize in. That's what these guys do every day, is try to find vulnerabilities and ways into your system. So depending on how that contract is written, they may break in at night. They may disrupt your network and bring it down. So how far down this rabbit hole you go becomes a little bit of a quandary. So it needs to be spelled out very carefully with that contractor. There was actually a contractor in Iowa that had some employees go a little rogue. They were not supposed to actually break in and enter, and they did, and were confronted by law enforcement, arrested for breaking and entering. Well, their contract didn't specify that was something they could do. So make sure that you have that. And typically, if you're on site doing a penetration test, you have a letter from whatever sponsoring agency, like the CEO, and a number to call and contact them. So they list a couple of those: black box, white box, gray box. So black box means we have nothing. So company got hired to penetrate Peru's network. They get no outside information. All they know is, here's a company and I need to attack it. So white box means we give them a lot of information. And then that gray box is kind of that in between. So you have just enough information to know a little bit about our company, but not enough to know how to directly get in there. But there's a lot of things that we can do. So passive typically is our first thing we're going to do, because we don't want to raise the alarm that we're trying to attack your network. So we do passive scanning. We do reconnaissance. So this may be involving, we may do, hey, I need to get on a campus. I know I can walk onto campus. I may just go visit and talk to the IT department secretary because I'm a prospective student and I'm interested in a career. And I can get some information about what kind of things are they using on campus. I may talk to a student, go, hey, where's your email hosted here on campus? So I know now how the email, so I know some ideas about that network. I may go online because in our state, every contract that as a public agency we do, we have to sign a contract and it's available online. So if you're curious and you want to find out, for example, when we used to have people that came and spoke to our campus, and we have had one this year. If you want to find out how much Peru State College paid for that out of your tuition, that's available online. So I can go out and I go look up Peru State College and go, oh, they have a contract with, all right, Barracuda. So they probably, here's a contract where they bought a Barracuda firewall. All right, I know some attacks on Barracuda or whoever it is that they can find that. So that's that idea of we're trying to find some reconnaissance, some information. We may do some social engineering because I can find out all the employees on a lot of cases right off their website. So the more information I have, the better I can get into your system. So what our goal typically is once we get inside of that network in some respect. So maybe I discover in a contract that you guys are using a Honeywell controller, a Jace, that we know has got a vulnerability, and I can get into it. And once I get into that controller for your HVAC, I turn that and then I enter the network in other ways. So that's that idea. What I'm trying to do is get privilege or escalation so that I can actually change and make changes on resources that are on your network. Just like if I were trying to come in here and steal whatever Peru State College has for secrets, that's what I'm going to do. And so it's a technical process in a lot of cases, but we also rely on all that social engineering and those skills. Because remember, most people are really dumb about passwords, right? So I might find Dr. Beardsley's email and think, oh, well, I know the format of that, so his login's going to be this. I know he's got admin credentials. Let me go on a social engineering site and find the names of his children and see if that happens to be a way I could brute force a password. If I have physical access, I'm going to do things like look on monitors, flip keyboards over, look in the drawer right there. And here's the one that I've seen again the other day, I thought was interesting, it's a picture on their desk. Turn over the picture, there's their password sitting on the back of it on a sticky note. So all those things that we think were kind of clever, it's not that clever. So we get our way in, and then we write a report, and then we send that back to them. So enterprise level, we're going to steal things that are valuable to the corporation. A lot of times that involves personal data. So if I break into a hospital, I get a lot of patient data. If I break into a college, I get a lot of data about students. So some of this, whether you're at the corporate level or on the personal level, you need to make some decisions about how much data you're allowing out there. And unfortunately, more and more organizations want us to give up our privacy. You get emails and you get solicitations from banks all the time. So I will say that when we just bought a house a little bit ago, that mortgage process, I have gotten more spam mail about all kinds of offers because at somewhere in there, I missed a checkbox saying, this bank is not going to sell my information. Or if I did check it, they certainly have not paid any attention. So we get information about people every day, and the amount of data on you is staggering. Staggering. So there's social media data. There's just where you've been surfing. Comcast, if you're getting internet from them, they know where you're surfing. Amazon knows what you're buying. Target knows what you're buying. Maybe they even hand out these, hey, handy little user surveys. Or in the case of a lot of places, to get a discount, you have to use a card with them, right? So if I want to get the discount for Casey's, I got to sign up for Casey's Rewards. Well, they're not doing that because they love you. You don't love the tasty pizza. They're getting that because then they know more and more data about you. And they're tracking every time you buy something because then they know what your purchasing habits are. It gives them more leverage to sell you more products. Great. And I don't know if Casey's does, but I suspect they do like everybody else. All that data enters a data market where your information, hey, I have 100,000 customers. Here's some data on them. You want to buy it? It doesn't just happen in retail, though. Every one of you at some point took one of those fun little ACT or SAT tests. And you had to pay to do that, right? Well, that same company then sells data to all the colleges. So if we want to get a list of every student with an ACT between 25 and 30 within a 150-mile radius of Peru, we order it up. And they now sell that data. So when you took those tests, somewhere in there you signed saying, oh, my data's okay, you can give it to some colleges. Our data's out there. How do we protect it? That's going to be one of our issues. So what happens if our data gets stolen? Well, we're going to be in trouble. It may identify something that we are involved in. Now, none of you are involved in any kind of illegal organizations, right? Well, except for Austin, apparently he's stealing in some kind of a business class. But if you've posted on a forum somewhere, you may get lumped in with some other group. So One of the things that's happening right now, which I think is very interesting, is companies like Blackboard and Instagram and whatever other social media platforms you are using, they're gathering data about you. And creditors have figured out something really kind of interesting. That credit score is a useful tool that they've come up with, but they've actually figured out that another way they can measure your likelihood of repaying that loan is by your social media presences and who you are associated with on that. So if you hang around a bunch of people with really crappy credit, the chances are your credit's crappy, right? And now that's not a bad thing for the credit companies, because guess what they like? If I take out a loan and I repay it before there's any interest, they don't really want me as a customer. They want people that are going to pay for 25 years for the night they went out on the old market and had too many beers, right? They want people to pay interest over time. So we have a lot of risks with our data floating around out there. So you would think that there's something we could magically do. And various places have passed a lot of different laws. You've probably seen now most of your websites you go to have a thing down on the bottom that'll pop up and say, hey, we just want to tell you we're using cookies and other things. And that's kind of driven by the European Privacy Act that passed. But we have a lot here. Sarbanes-Oxley, the PCI controls, HIPAA, FERPA, NERPA, NERC, all these different organizations have rules, requirements. Here's the problem. If I'm sitting in Croatia, do I give a crap about some law that got passed in California? Probably not, because the chance of being extradited is pretty low. So data privacy, we really need to bake in. We can't just legislate it in. It sounds good that we can create a law that says we have to do things, but when the person we're trying to control doesn't have any care at all, what are you going to do? So we need to make sure that data is labeled. We handle it carefully. So we have sensitive data. Personal identifiable data is handled very carefully. So most companies, we create a methodology of how we're going to handle data. Ensure that data is gone. So credit card data, when you put in your credit card, all the credit card companies say that data doesn't persist. It's gone the minute you flush that transaction through. But what we found, numerous companies stored that credit card data, a not safe practice. So that data needs to be destroyed. We need to have rules about how data, especially that PHI, the personal identifiable information. So what else can we do? So we create our posture. In other words, how are we going to handle data? How are we going to deal with individuals and organizations? We configure as many controls as we can, and we harden our network as much as possible. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. So if you go to NIST, there's actually even Active Directory policies you can grab. So some of the things that you may want to do. Observe systems and networks. Well, I hope you are, but a lot of small companies, once something is up and running, it never gets looked at again. So if we're using a vulnerability tool, do we put a baseline in and then see what's happening over time? Have we started to add more holes, which typically happens on our firewalls? We start adding exceptions and rules. So we also look at what that data is and what do we need to do with it. Is it confidential? Do we need to protect it that model? Is it dealing with integrity? Is it dealing with availability? In other words, all the data in the world is great, but if I can't see and use it every day, then it's a problem. Even things like safety become an issue. Because while we're doing this process on the outside area, yeah, I think razor wire around the server closet would be a great idea. Probably not a safe idea. So we want to prevent as many people from getting access, both physical and cyber. But we also have to think about a couple of other things. So a lot of our equipment, if it's going to fail, does it fail open or fail closed? And from a security standpoint on my data, I hope it fails closed. So in other words, if our router or a switch or something else fails, I want it to shut down and I want no traffic to be passed. But on the other hand, I also sometimes, if I'm on a physical site, I have to take consideration about people. If when we lost power, all the doors slammed shut and locked and you couldn't get back out of that building, that's going to be an issue for people. So even though they automatically lock, provide some method of exit. So we have to be careful about that. So doors that automatically lock. So sometimes we have that issue. We lose power and doors are set to automatically unlock to let people out of the building. Well, if I know that, can I use that as a way to get into egress? Hey, look, there's a wire above this door jamb. Snip, door's unlocked. So I need to think about how that works. So sometimes we have to prioritize safety or security. And then this idea of hardening. So passwords. And I know you think, who doesn't have a password on an account? I walked into a business this year, since December, that used a billing system that they had bypassed the passwords on. And to bill, they needed people's social security number and all kinds of other data. They also had disabled any log-offs on the terminals, so those PCs are sitting there wide open if somebody just wanted to walk by, log into a system. All you had to know was the first name of the employee working there. Probably a little frightening. So make sure that we turn those kinds of things off. Management interfaces. So things like our firewall. Do we have the default password? Admin is not safe. Sure, it's convenient. Things like our copiers. Oh, here, you just installed a new Canon copier for us. Hey, guess what? Here's how you get in. Canon. Log into admin. Administrator. 7654321. Every Canon copier sold, this multifunction device, which I have a particular hatred in a weird way for multifunction devices because they're a great gateway into a lot of networks because nobody secures them. In addition to that, in terms of security, most copiers actually now have hard drives in them. And from that management interface, you know, that administration 7654321 that nobody ever changes, it takes a picture or a JPEG and it stores it of everything it's ever scanned or copied or sent through. That's not a security issue, is it? Oh, yeah, it really is a great treasure trove. So you can find some really, truly disturbing things in there. So turning off things that aren't necessary, using those time blocks. If nobody is in the building after 7 o'clock, why are services available? Turn them off. Turn off wireless even. So try to minimize that exposure you have. And then what happens if something does happen? Who do we do? Well, we can set up alerts on a lot of systems, or lockouts. So if you're not locking somebody out after 3 or 4 password attempts, that's just saying, hey, let's use a brute force password on this system. So you want to have those. Yes, is it inconvenient? Because I guarantee you're going to have somebody in your company that every other day has to have their password reset. Balancing safety and convenience. So there are some issues that way. So we also want to look at what kind of reports can we generate over time. So we might look at how much data, what kind of attacks. So we need to make sure our data is labeled correctly and handled correctly. So a lot of times we'll put in different types of information. So PII, personally identifiable information. So kept secure, HIPAA, PHI data. So if it's proprietary or the company, so maybe there's something that Peru State knows that no other college knows, that's proprietary data. So those kinds of things are in there. So there really is data that we can expose and we don't care about, but there's also data that we have to be very careful about. And there are a lot of different organizations. So FERPA and the Federal Education Group are a little cranky about some of that. So here we have an issue then. What do we do with all this data? So now we have all these papers, because one of the things we threaten that we're going to have a paperless office, what we really do is have the ability to print out more papers than ever. And so one of the problems we have then is we have all these documents. Well, how do we deal with them? Typically, we shred them. In our building, here's what we do that I really love. Anything that's confidential, we put inside of a trash can that's locked that says, confidential, put all your stuff there. If I want to steal your information, what's the first place I'm going to go do? I'm going to walk in with a clipboard and say, hey, I'm with Paper Tiger, and I've just rolled out with all this confidential data. Crap. So you need a policy and a way to identify and make sure that's really true. So electronic data, how do we get rid of it? Well, I talked about those copiers, and I've done some interesting things. I've gotten to go in and look at some copiers that were turned in on leases and whatever else. Do you know how many people ever take the drives out and destroy them before they just hand over their copier with every piece of business information in it? Virtually none. So you need to know up front, hey, I'm going to delete that, I'm going to take it out and make it go away. So now you'll start to see some contracts actually say at the end of the contract, we walk away handing you the drives and we'll put some new ones in if they're going to resell that machine. So the way to get rid of hard drives, for example, the delete key on your Windows machine or your Linux machine is really a bad idea because it really doesn't delete anything. It just marks the space where that file is stored as able to be used in the future. And until something writes over it, you can still go get that data pretty darn easily. So you have to be a little careful about that. So the way to do it, and quite frankly, with the price of hard drives, what I typically do is I'll drill a hole through the drive to make it physically impossible to use it. So old style hard drives, we drill them. If it's some of the newer style drives, so one of the issues we have is I will break them into pieces if I think there's recoverable data on there. And so I have one in my hand, an NVMe M.2 drive. Well, yeah, there's data on there. How do I secure that? Well, I break it into pieces to make it really hard to do it or throw it through some kind of destruction machine. So a lot of companies that are really big, Google or somebody that's got data centers, they actually will have an on-site grinder so the hard drive gets ground up into little bitty chunks as they go through there. So there are other ways. There are delete functions that are supposedly, they'll put zeros, ones on every spot in there. Probably, unless you're the NSA, nobody's ever going to get that data back. But at the price of hard drives now, it's kind of a why bother thing, unfortunately. So, a lot of things in this chapter to kind of get you thinking about how do we protect our business. So, we looked at a lot of those pieces. How do I escape and make my world better? And that's really what we're looking at, is how do I make that situation better? And some of this is not pleasant. Writing security protocols and getting people to listen to you and do what you say. Because I will tell you, trying to get people to log off their computers is trying to separate like 5-year-olds from a big sugar bar. Oh, wait, every time I leave, I need to go Windows L if I'm on a Windows machine to log off? And sometimes you have to put some teeth in there through other departments, HR, or in a small company through the boss. And they need to lead by example. If it's a small company and everybody else has to log off, but they know the boss just leaves his computer on all day long, there's not going to be any compliance in there. So these are all some of the tools that we have available, and not an exhaustive list by any means. I'll do it this way then.